Hello and welcome to On Deadline. I'm Dennis Owens.
And I'm Amanda St. Hilaire. Kendra Nichols has the day off.
If you're listening for the first time, we're journalists for ABC27 News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But on this podcast, we talk about issues that affect people all over.
And that's why these are the conversations you don't hear on the news. We're different generations with different experiences, so we don't always agree, but we do get very personal, get very real, and hopefully get you thinking. We are recording on Monday, January. Are you about to talk about the Eagles?
I was. How did you know that?
Because I promised at the beginning that I would limit your Eagles gloating.
Go ahead. You say your line.
Oh, no. We're recording on Monday, January 22nd, 2018.
The
Dennis,
day after
take
the
it away.
Eagles win the NFC Championship.
If you haven't been able to tell, Dennis is a little bit of an Eagles fan.
Yes.
Just look at Twitter. But today we're not talking about the Eagles. We are talking about weather and school. So we all know the excitement, or maybe if you're a parent, the dread of finding out your school's called a snow day, a delay, an early dismissal. So how do superintendents make these decisions, especially when things are different from one end of the district to the other? And how has that process changed? And then later we'll talk about this winter's weather trends and what we can expect looking ahead to the rest of the season. So we are joined today by Cumberland Valley School District Superintendent Dr. Frederick Withum. Hello.
Good morning.
Doctor, before we go any further, the mascot of the Cumberland Valley?
The Eagle.
There you go.
You're going to try and sneak these references in throughout the whole thing. And then we have another Eagles fan, ABC27 meteorologist Dan Tomaso. Hey, Dan.
Good morning. Glad to see everybody. Happy to be here.
So, Dr. Withum, we want to start with you because Cumberland Valley is one of the biggest high schools in this region population-wise, and geographically speaking, the district is huge. So what is your process for deciding school delays, cancellations, or early dismissals? Where do you even begin with that?
Well, you hit a key point. This year, with all of our students, staff, support staff, faculty, when we make a weather-related change in the schedule, it immediately impacts over 10,000 individuals. And then that just ripples out from there when it impacts families and businesses, as in turn, people prepare for their students to stay at home or come home early.
So you do get that sometimes you cause great angst with parents when you say, and you don't take it lightly, right? I mean,
Absolutely. We really do have to consider with our size that we just don't cause personal angst, we cause economic angst. I mean, we really, with a district this size, can tip the economic scale if we begin to, call parents home from work in order to care for their children. So, it's always absolutely, no matter what, student safety first. I mean, that is absolutely, no matter what's going on, our student safety comes above everything else. But more often than not, it's not always a black and white decision. It's more of a gray area where you've got to decide what do we do, and we take those other things into account.
So what do you start doing, and how far in advance do you start doing it to gather the information you need to make those decisions?
Obviously, we watch the weather. Channel 27 in particular, I have to say, I tune into on a regular basis.
Certified most accurate, right?
Yes,
That's right.
That's right. There you go. We also have a relationship where we receive messages from PennDOT. And we also get a lot of information from our township, from our road crews, as they are receiving information from around the area. We don't necessarily contract with anybody to do that, but we have a tremendous amount of information that flows in. Sometimes we'll begin talking 5 days in advance about the what ifs. We track it from there, depending on the timing of the events. Typically 24 hours before we're talking. A lot of times these things just seem to roll in overnight or late in the afternoon. If you're talking about a decision that needs to be made overnight, the process begins between 4 and 4:30 a.m. The superintendents begin a conversation with each other about what's going on across the county, what are their understanding about road delays and road closures. The thing that's really important is that no single school district in Cumberland County is in and of itself but we transfer kids across district lines to private and parochial schools. Homeless children that were originally in our district but ended up in a shelter or a living situation that is beyond our borders still attend for normalcy the Cumberland Valley School District. Likewise with Carlisle and Big Spring and East Penn, the rest of the school districts are in the same set of circumstances. So we need to know first initially what is going on countywide.
So, and I'm always curious about this because you all seem to be on the same page a lot of the time. But Amanda happens to live in a neighborhood where on the same street you've got 3 school districts, Cumberland Valley being one, East Pennsboro being another, Camp Hill being another. Then you've also got Big Spring and Boiling Springs and Carlisle are all kind of right around you. Who are you talking to? Do you guys all come to the same conclusions? Because it wouldn't look good if 2 of you say we're closing and 2 of you say we're open. Then people are like, well, what's the deal with that?
It is always a hot debate. And I think increasingly as we suburbanize in Cumberland County, you're going to see districts begin to do very different things. Blowing snow in Hamden Township is not something that is as big a consideration as blowing snow in the Big Spring School District. And then as you move from east to west, you'll find all kinds of variations. So much so that, we'll have people who contact us and say, I can't believe you didn't have school today. My road is open, the sun is shining, and the streets are melting. And other people in the district haven't even been able to get out of their driveway yet. Ultimately, though, the decision is about getting buses into the bus stops and how safely the kids can board the buses and come back. And, it can't be we open 3/4 of the school or half the school district. We have to decide what is the situation across the school district and then make the best call for everyone.
And it's all or nothing at that point, right?
It is all or nothing.
So I'm one of those. The other day it started as a 2-hour delay, which I thought was perfect. And I was out right at the 2-hour mark. And from my house to the school was bone dry. But the fact is you're considering lots of other places too, right?
And there's one of those difficult decisions where, the weather forecast at that point in time still could go either way. It had varied back and forth as to when it was exactly going to start, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And when we all got up at 4:30 in the morning and started the discussions, there was no snow. The roads were in fact dry. And I think people would have been very upset if we had closed school and didn't start until 2 o'clock. Because again, there's one of those positions where businesses don't get their employees coming in because we've called school. And if there's no reason to call school, it creates a situation.
Dan Tomaso, I see you nodding a lot.
Well, and so I wanted to ask a little bit about the timing of everything. So in that case, the snow was very light to start out, but then maybe did pick up by the evening commute. How do you consider then early dismissals? Is that harder than even when to start school?
It is. And again, when talking about how across the county things are changing, with road construction on 81 and with Silver Spring Township being the fastest growing township in the Commonwealth, the Carlisle Pike is a major point of access east to west for everybody. We put our buses on the Carlisle Pike and there is an accident on 81 and they divert traffic to the Carlisle Pike. We could have students on the buses for 2.5 hours just trying to get home. The other thing about CV is, if you know us geographically, we've got the Conneaut running east to west, but wildly moving north to south as it meanders. So the bridge crossings are only every so often. You get Middlesex and 114 and Orrstown and Sample Bridge and all those. So you could literally be at a bus stop and be looking across the creek at a house that's 150 yards away, but you've got to come all the way back down that peninsula and all the way up to the bridge, cross it, and then to the tip on the other side in order to get to it. So we have to consider on early dismissal, what is the other potential threat to not getting kids home in a reasonable amount of time, in addition to the fact that the roads could just be flat out icy and dangerous for buses.
Right.
There's always that person who, and sometimes those people who say, well, back in my day, we didn't have snow days, 10 feet of snow, and I walked uphill both ways. Is it just a perception that now there are more cancellations or delays? Is that a reality? And what's kind of feeding into all that?
I think it first of all, I think it kind of tends to swing. You get a few winners where it's really great and nobody's asking any questions. Then you get a few winners like we had several years ago where it seemed like every other day we had something in question.
As we go through and look at how this process works, I guess my question is, has the process changed? Is it a reality that now we have more snow days and delays, or is that just kind of human nature where we think back to how much harder we all had it when we were younger?
There may have been fewer snow days, but what I would also say is that there was probably less traffic. There was
fewer lawyers.
Fewer lawyers. And I also think that parents are less apt to keep their kids home no matter what. And that plays into it as well. So it's, I think there's just changing expectations, changing levels of traffic, and it creates an interesting dynamic.
That's a good point you just made, because back in the day that you're talking about, mom was probably more likely to stay home, and then it wouldn't really matter. But now, if mom is working, as so many moms are, now she's got to or dads. What I don't want to be sexist about that, but somebody's got to readjust their schedule, and then that creates some issues at home.
Right. And the other piece too is because really, we really try and focus on days in, not days out. That not just weather related, but even when we build our calendar for the entire school year, we're considering how many days can we get in, not how many days can we take off, and when are they. But in Cumberland Valley School District, 20% of the students are economically disadvantaged. So we are a hot place for 8 hours for some students. We are the hot meal that they get for the day. And on weekends, we work with agency partners who will send food home with the students. So, we particularly have an event that happens on a Friday. It can impact those families for the entire weekend because the food's not distributed in backpacks. Likewise, we have an event on a Monday. Any food that was distributed might be gone, and we are the source for the hot meal for the kids. And again, it's safety first, but that's something that is very different in our decision making than it was just 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, and now we have more information further out from the actual event than we did 10 or 15 years ago. That's something you talk a lot about, Dan.
Yeah, and you were saying about the data you received just from PennDOT alone. I mean, the number of forecast models that we consider and look at and agonize over, I mean, that's where those timelines come from that we talk about leading into a storm. So, I was told a long time ago when I was in college, we become data interpreters as meteorologists, that we try to interpret the message for you. What else would help, when we're looking at this weather data and we're trying to pinpoint timing, 4-hour window, 6-hour window, what else would help you?
Well, I used to teach Earth and space science, and I have an affinity to watch these kinds of things fold and unfold. And I will tell you that compared to what things were 10 years ago, I mean, it is absolutely amazing what is at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. In some cases, too much information. What time is it going
Overload.
What time is it going to start in Big Spring? How quickly will it begin in northern York County? And it really then becomes a little bit more complicated in sorting it all out.
Sure.
You got to have thick skin for this job, because no matter what call you make, someone's not going to be happy with you.
Well, it comes with the territory.
and part of it, as far as getting kids in, like you say, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and God bless you for that. I don't know why you're not getting up at 4:30 and saying everybody needs to go back to bed. And the roads are dry. You can get everybody in, and then that gets to count as a day, even if you have to send them home at noon, right?
It counts as a day, but it also counts as a day of lost education. If we don't have a day of school, typically that day is made up. And we try and stagger our early snow days prior to state testing. When you have a half a day or you have a partial day, a delay, an early dismissal, you don't get that day in. And let's face it, I don't care how old you get, whether you're in third grade or 12th grade or you're a superintendent, you can't help but feel excited when you're sitting in a school and it starts snowing and you're looking out the window and you're watching it come down.
So that doesn't go away with age.
Oh, it does not. It does not. Neither does the night before summer vacation and when that last bell rings when you go out, and you're not as productive when you're faced with that kind of external stimulus in your classroom. So in some cases, it really does create an issue of lost learning. I think the other thing that's often not recognized on these calls is that we have to equally consider the people who are coming to school, because just because students don't come to school, administrators come to school. We have offices that we have to decide. We may not have students, but recently in our last call, the school closed, but the offices remained open. In some cases, it might not be appropriate to even open the offices. And in all cases, we have essential personnel that have to check on the buildings, make sure the systems are functioning. They have to clear the parking lots and ready. We have now 10 facilities, 2 support facilities, and all come with their own roads and parking lots and sidewalks that we need to clear. So we have to decide on the safety of our employees who are coming in. In some cases, when we've had the 30-inch snows, we've had to even say to them, everything just stops. And we have a brave facilities manager who'll come in and make the rounds and check on the buildings as soon as he can, and then get his crew in to start that cleanup work as soon as we can get to it.
I'd imagine it's almost easier, when you're getting 30 inches of snow, okay, this is going to be shut down. It's when you're getting maybe an inch or two, but there's a layer of ice underneath that, and then we're getting bitter cold, that it sounds like that gets a lot more complicated.
It does. Matter of fact, I don't recall in the past 20, 30 years really talking about what is the wind chill threshold.
Yes, I was going to ask about this.
Yeah, minus 15 is where we are with the wind chill threshold. So if we have sub-zero temperatures and a minus 15 wind chill, that will tend to cause us to close our buildings.
So even if there's no snow?
Even if there's no snow.
Is that because of, buses not running well and safety waiting out for the buses?
A number of things. Yes, safety on the bus stops. The other thing is you get a child out to the bus stop and then a bus doesn't come because the diesel in the tanks gel. And in some of the new buses, the diesel, the bus will start and run, but then for safety for these highly efficient motors, will shut down as the diesel begins to thicken. We'll also have, again, all of our building systems. You get a burst pipe in a building, and that can close a building for a day. We need to get in. We need to make sure that the heat's on, that the water's running, that the toilet's flush. So sometimes a 2-hour delay in the cold is also about making sure that we are prepared to operate the buildings. The last thing we want to do is get 700 kids into an elementary school and then find out there's no heat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then that creates even more of a disruption for families. When there's school, everyone has to go home. It sounds like a lot of information to consider in a very short period of time.
It does. And people are the information flows so quickly nowadays. We had one of your competitors erroneously report that we were closed. And
Can you tell us who?
I know.
He had to ask.
But it was a competitor.
It was a competitor.
So keep it
was
on
a competitor.
ABC27.
And I don't know if they mixed up Conestoga Valley with Cumberland Valley. I don't know if someone pushed the wrong button. But we had our switchboards in all of our buildings flood with calls, and people begin to prepare to leave work to get home to receive their kids. And we hadn't made the call yet. And the worst thing about it was we were in conversations to make the call. Mm-hmm. So after we told them, no, we haven't closed yet, an hour later we turned around and we were sending the kids home.
And that's hard. How has your perspective on all this shifted, going from teaching to now being in the hot seat making those calls?
I have to tell you, I think I was more... I looked forward more to it as a teacher. And of course, when I was teaching, I had kids at home, and, snow days can be still fun family events. They can be stressful, when you have both parents working and those kinds of things. But it's inevitable that if you're going to have children and you're going to send them to public school, the school will close. If you can prepare and make it as fun a day as possible, it can be a nice family event. It's not as nice a family event when you close the school for a day and you're fielding all of the phone calls about it, because typically I think you'll find that in most districts, again, unless it's one of those 30-inch snows, that the central office staff are working all day and in communication.
So our esteemed colleague Flora Pastorero is notorious. At least I'd be on the air with her. She expects that the minute she gets in her car and begins driving to work, regardless if that's during the teeth of a 22-inch snowstorm or not, that the road should be clear for her. And frankly, who can disagree with that?
That's it.
So I was always preaching to her, Flora, patience. You have to let the storm pass, and then you got to leave a little time for people to clear the roads. And then if after a lot of time, then you can complain. And as a Harrisburg resident, I often was justified in complaining because 3 weeks later they still hadn't. Another story, I digress. But my point was, patience, Flora. Is that your message to parents?
It is, and it's interesting that you bring that road clearing thing up, because there's another area where things have changed. The ability to clear the roads, the technology that they use, the GPS, and a lot of times now, just the flat out expense, they might not get to it based on the level of salt that is already existing that's been sprayed on the roads. And then from there, they might want to get out and get it immediately so it doesn't pack down, or they might actually think it's better for it to build up. So we've seen some real changes in and they're logical rationale. I'm not suggesting that they're bad, but there's a different sequence of events for road clearances. And people do, I think, need to be patient, and superintendents included, based on an understanding that townships are dealing with increasing numbers of miles of road.
And again, in such a large district, I'm a CV grad, CV Eagle.
Proudly so.
And one of my best friends growing up went to the same high school, lived 40 minutes away from me. And so 40 minutes away can be a very different situation than what you're seeing, completely different municipality, completely different process.
Well, you mentioned blowing snow. So when you get, I guess, west, there's some real rural areas as you butt up to that next district over there where there's farmland and things of that nature, which could blow across the road. And that creates an issue that in Hampden Township and Silver Spring we're not really dealing with.
Correct. And for CV, when you run along the main corridors, it's not an issue. The closer you get to the north or the south mountain, again, there's where the bulk of our open farmland sits, not the bulk of our student population. But again, you've got to kind of make a decision based on the best decision that we can make for all of the students. The other thing that I would say too is there's still a level of parent decision making in these situations that we respect. I don't know another superintendent who is going to, ding a kid for not coming to school when we hold school and parents just say, I just don't feel safe putting my child on a bus, on the road as a young driver. Those kinds of things. There are times built into the school code, family emergency days, other ways that frankly, a lot of times we will just excuse it if it becomes questionable and we feel like we've got to get ourselves open. 2 years ago, when we had the 30-inch plus snow, it was wildly different as to how fast neighborhoods were clearing out. But when we got to the point where we had the bulk of our neighborhoods, we started school again on a 2-hour delay. But then the message to the principals was, for the rest of this week, if a family keeps a child home, don't mark them unexcused. It's not a truancy. It's something that they're dealing with the same way that we're dealing with.
Right. You're giving them that flexibility.
Right.
So the message is patience, and if you have to point the finger, point it at the weather guys.
There you go.
And I think
Eric Finkenbinder, right?
That's right. He's the chief after all.
Yes, we'll tell him it all rests with him. Dr. Withum, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure we will have you on again in the future to talk all things weather and school and anything else that might be on your mind.
Thank you.
Meteorologist Dan Tomaso, It is your turn to be in the hot seat. Time of year when we get all kinds of questions about winter weather. So what trends have you noticed so far this winter season?
Well, I think the biggest trend that is the highlight, and unfortunately you said hot seat, more of the cold seat this month, we had the record coldest start to a new year to start out January. So when you talk about that, I was just looking back at some of the records. The first 4 days of the month set records in terms of temperatures. Now, some of these records were even low high temperatures. So the lowest high temperature recorded for that day across the area. So it was pretty remarkable. I don't think it's something we will soon forget, and it may be the biggest highlight of the winter. La Nina winters, which we are in a La Nina pattern. A lot of people talk about El Nino, but La Nina also has effects on our weather. Generally, we don't see long cold spells in a La Nina pattern. So this is a little unusual, but now, of course, this is now the end of January, and we're starting to climb out of that cold weather slowly but surely.
So I believe the President of the United States tweeted something about when it was so cold. We need to see it. We need a little more global warming around here. So for all the skeptics that are saying because there's a cold snap, there must not be global warming, right? You say what?
Can I add that in response to that, I saw a great meme online that is a picture of the Titanic sinking, and part of it is straight up in the air, and it's showing people on board saying, well, if we're sinking, why are we so high up in the air?
That's very funny. I mean, it is sort of the same analogy, for sure. We were the coldest spot on Earth during that cold spell. So, yes, the eastern United States, there's a large population of people. But meanwhile, all the president or anyone else had to do was look out west and see the dangerous drought, heat, and then wildfires that were occurring. So we had very hot weather, dry weather to the west, and then to the east, we were in a trough of low pressure, and we saw these continuing bouts of cold air coming in.
And global warming causes extremes, right?
Correct.
And so that can be an extreme on the other end of the spectrum.
No scientist has ever said cold air is going to go away with global warming or climate change. You will still get bouts of cold air, but when you look at the average, and again, climate versus weather, you're talking averages over a long time, weather's more short term, you will see, by and large, the trends still show warming, even with that 2-week cold spell.
And the point is, no one snapshot of 2 weeks means anything about the bigger picture, right?
Absolutely right, especially when the oceans are the driver of climate. There is more ocean than there is land mass on the Earth, and so the oceans change at a much slower pace, and that's why when you look at things, the Pacific Ocean near the equator, that's where El Nino, La Nina take place. That's why even that small section of the ocean can have such a drastic effect on weather patterns downstream over the United States. So, I always go back to very warm oceans, but sometimes there's cold land. When there's cold land, sometimes that means storminess too. So winter always has a way of evening itself out in this area. At least in my lifetime, I have not experienced a winter that was purely cold.
But the last 2 years, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, you're the expert, that we didn't have much snow except for one big one dumped on us. That happened each of the last 2 winters.
Correct.
But now we seem to be back to some dribs and drab stuff.
Right, and the dribs and drabs, I think, are the annoyance part, especially for Cumberland Valley School District or any other school district that has to decide. We call them nuisance storms because they don't create a lot of snow, they don't create a lot of ice, but it's just enough to, keep the roadways in poor condition. But I will say, February is the month where we have the most amount of average snow in a winter. So yes, January is cold. It is I call it the pit of winter. It is always the coldest month. However, February, the second and third weeks of February, climatologically speaking, offer the most chances for storms along the East Coast. So we are not out of it. There could still be a big one coming, but so far it has not been the year of the big snow.
Our producer, Eric Semmel, who is a huge skier and a lover of winter, is doing high fives over there. Bring it on, he's saying.
And Eric will know, too, that when you look at areas outside of the Harrisburg region, the Susquehanna Valley, there has been a lot of snow in the Northeast.
Erie too.
Oh,
that's in its own category at this point.
Yeah, and actually that was because of the cold air outbreak. All the cold air was coming in from the west and the northwest. Well, when the wind blows from the northwest or the west over relatively warm lake water, that produces your lake effect snow bands over and over and over again. So as long as that wind is still coming from the same direction, it just keeps snowing.
Well, once
that
lake freezes, then that stops, right? Isn't that the key?
Correct. But now we're in a process where some of that ice has thawed due to the warming. So believe it or not, parts of New York at the Tug Hill Plateau, they see a ton of snow every single year. they were seeing more lake effect snow. Even towards Syracuse, they were seeing more snow last week from the lake.
I know that place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good place.
Great school. We've said the phrase ice jam a lot this winter, more so than I remember in recent winters. So what factors into all that?
Well, I mean, really what it comes down to is we had that long period of cold weather, and usually when it's cold, it's generally dry. So not much was changing. It was just a lot of cold air in one place. The rivers started to freeze up, and for a while that ice was solid. But then we had a thawing event last week, and we had rain, but the rain was heavier to the north and northwest of us. And I always say this, that when you look at the Susquehanna Basin, when we have the biggest floods here, or the biggest issues in Harrisburg and points south, it's when there's more rain to the north of us. Because all of a sudden, the Susquehanna River acts like a pipe. It brings all that water down from the north, the northwest, and that's when you start adding up quickly down here. Now, the issue with an ice jam is that we have no way of actually forecasting ice jams themselves.
They're very unpredictable.
Right. They're very unpredictable. They're kind of beasts of their own desire, that if you get one jam along a bridge on the right side of the bridge, but then the left side's open, the right side may start to flood because the water's really just piling up in one spot. This time around, it was York and Lancaster counties that may have gotten the brunt of the minor flooding. Jams near Wrightsville. I saw a Facebook post from a longtime York County resident saying they used to use dynamite in the river to break up some of the ice.
It up. Yep.
And I don't remember that.
The ice itself can be a problem too. It's not just the rising water. Those are basically
ice is causing
slabs
the rising water.
Right, but I mean the actual the ice itself, it's like a slab of concrete
like a
that
battering
can
ram,
come up and really do some damage.
And we all remember 1996. I remember the famous footage that Chuck Rhodes narrated, and it was on the Weather Channel. It was like the 27 video claim to fame. You can still find it on YouTube and everything else. But that was a supreme amount of ice flooding from not only a thawing event, but a lot of rain in the Susquehanna River Basin. And hopefully we won't repeat that anytime soon.
But I have to say, for anybody that hasn't done it, it is fascinating to see when all that ice is across there. At some points, it was like over my head. It was like 10 or 12 feet tall.
And that's the thing, it moves in very odd ways. It's kind of eerie watching ice move and pile up. If you want a good follow some of the folks in Connecticut on Twitter, some of the meteorologists. NBC Connecticut is one of the places I go to for information, and they've had tremendous problems on the Connecticut River of jamming. And they actually have to send the Coast Guard. They have icebreakers that come down the river and help break up the ice. We don't have that here, obviously, but we do have our ice issues, and people actually spot and report back to the National Weather Service what's happening.
One last question for you, and I know you don't forecast more than 7 days out, but as a general outlook type of thing, what could we be looking at for the rest of this winter season?
So I think the main takeaway is shorter cold spells. It will still get cold from time to time, but La Nina winters generally have warm air just hanging back. It will either be warm for a while, or that warm air will quickly come back into place. This week is a good example of that. We have 2 colder days in the forecast. Average highs for the end of January, upper 30s. We'll be in the upper 30s for 2 days, and then another rainstorm comes by, and we're back to 50 degrees within 2 more days. So I think the prolonged cold is over, but I still think there's that chance for a bigger snow and or ice storm before the end of February.
Well, and if that happens, we'll be the ones standing out in it, telling you it's snowing, telling you it's happening, and you'll be the one telling people what's going to happen.
Right. I was going to say, or I'll be stuck in the studio for 12 hours straight.
Yeah. Other people get snow days. For us, snow and ice, that means, hey, you come to work.
Day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Meteorologist Dan Tomaso, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
If you'd like to check out the links to the stories, articles, and videos we discussed, you can find them in our show notes on our website, ABC27.com. I'm sure Dennis will find a way to sneak an Eagles article.
I was just going to say, go Eagles
there.
Before we go.
To get On Deadline delivered directly to your phone, tablet, or computer each week, subscribe in iTunes or Google Play Music. Please record your thoughts, questions, and suggestions about episodes in voice memos on your phone and email them to us at theinvestigators@abc27.com. That's theinvestigators, THE investigators, at abc27.com. Please take a few minutes and leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. It helps improve what we're doing, helps us reach other people, and sometimes it's just fun to read those reviews. Thank you, Eric Semmel, for producing this podcast, and Jason Dietz for composing and recording the music. It's time for us to go. We're on deadline.